You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the FT's Whitehall editor, Sebastian Payne, and the Belfast Telegraph columnist, Allison Morris. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages now. The Times has an interview with the Prime Minister, who says he finds police forces neglecting the issue of violence against women infuriating. Speaking to the Telegraph, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has made similar comments. Women are facing an epidemic of indecent exposure, reports The Guardian, which says police recorded more than 10,000 cases last year, but took fewer than 600 cases to court. The Eye hears that Army personnel will begin driving fuel tankers from Monday in an effort to ease the petrol shortage. That's also the big story for the Mail. The Mirror describes Boris Johnson as having been caught short by the supply crisis. According to the Financial Times, the drug maker Merck is to seek regulatory approval in the US to distribute the first pill that actively treats COVID-19 and which Merck claims halves the risk of death from the virus. The Sun, meanwhile, says that the England football team has been thrown into disarray as several players are refusing COVID jabs, despite Qatar's entry ban on all unvaccinated people. Falling holiday prices and the scrapping of COVID tests to travel have led to a surge in bookings. That's the lead for the Express. While the Star has word of a shortage of a different kind, apparently we've run out of clowns. Who's going to be upset by that? Well, we're joined tonight by Sebastian Payne and Allison Morris. Good to see you both. Let's start with the Times and that interview with the Prime Minister, who's furious over the police inaction on violence against women. Allison, to you first.
I do. I think it's obvious that the fallout from the Sarah Everard case is going to end up with this kind of comment from people like the Prime Minister, from Priti Patel, in terms of how the police are handling these crimes against women. And we know that there has been an epidemic and an upsurge in violence against women since the start of lockdown. And I do believe that from the Prime Minister, this is genuine. If you remember and recall back, his wife, Carrie Simons, was very instrumental in the John Warboys case and trying to have his parole revoked. And I know that she's been instrumental in campaigning for tougher sentences for sex offenders. So I think this is something you don't have to have someone who has been, has been impacted by a crime like this to feel strongly about it. But I do think that the Prime Minister genuinely does feel very strongly about this. And you would hope that it shouldn't have taken a tragedy like this to try and show the entire criminal justice system from start to finish that there needs to be more done to protect women, but it does need to be from the ground up. You know, when women report a crime to the police, they have to be sure, whether it's the Metropolitan Police, whether it's the Police Service of Northern Ireland, that when they get that call out, that they will get the same consistent service across the board, and that the criminal justice system and the courts and the public prosecution service will take these crimes seriously. And that's something that I think, as we've been speaking about the fallout from this awful, horrendous case, that is something going forward that I really would hope that there will be some serious reform and change to how these cases are handled.
Yes, and Sebastian, in the interview, the Prime Minister says that the public are right to feel that the police are failing women and girls who are subjected to violence and sexual abuse. That is extremely damning.
It is, and I think the fact you've got the Prime Minister intervening on a case like this shows the extent of the problem that the Met is now facing. In another interview, Boris Johnson has urged the public to still trust the police, and it's extraordinary the Prime Minister has to come out and say that now, since you would think that would be an absolute given. But in that Times interview that you mentioned on the front page there in the run-up to the Conservative Party conference starting this weekend, Boris Johnson has kind of said that there does need to be a serious look at the Met policies, needs to have a look at institutional reform, but crucially, he still backs Cressida Dick, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police there. There's been many people across the political spectrum today calling on her to resign, from the former Labour Deputy Leader Harriet Harman to various MPs, Conservative, Labour, as well as other figures in public life. But Boris Johnson says that, he worked with Dame Cressida when he was London Mayor, and he has confidence in her. But I think there is going to have to be some kind of big, sweeping institutional reform at the Met, because because if you look at their policies and if you look at the fact that Wayne Couzens went through various vetting checks and this wasn't detected, and of course many people are now asking questions about were there signs missed here, and we now know the Independent Office for Police Investigations is now looking at 5 other officers who are in a WhatsApp group with Wayne Couzens. And so this clearly does seem to be an institutional thing, but I think, all you just have to think about is it needs to move fast, and the Met needs to move quickly to try and restore faith in itself, because, many women that I know of my age who live in London feel completely petrified at the moment. They're worried, they're very fearful, and they don't feel as if the response from the police following this horrific sentencing and trial has really matched up to the moment.
Alison, what do you think and how do you feel when you hear the Prime Minister saying trust the police?
Well, the issue is here, I think that what the Met would like us to think is that this was just one rotten apple and that his service in the police had nothing to do with what happened, but it was instrumental into how he got Sarah into the car. He used his police credentials to lure her into the car. He used his handcuffs to restrain her. These are all, important parts of this crime. And so the Met does have to take responsibility for the person who was a member of their force, who there were red flags in relation to, and I think that their handling of it in the past few, 24 hours has not been great. This sort of advice that they've given out to women, should they be concerned if they're approached by a lone officer, stop trying to put responsibility onto the victims of these crimes, stop trying to put them on to women. And I know what Sebastian said about his female friends feeling frightened because of this. We were always frightened, as women and as a mother of two daughters in their 20s. We've always, had these issues with, when you're out running, I wouldn't put headphones in if I was out walking on my own, in case someone came up behind me, carrying your car keys in your fingers in case someone tries to approach you. We've all pretended to be speaking on the phone to imaginary phone calls because there's been men walking behind us to try and put them off, and because of that fear. And that has always existed, and that's something that I think that, this sort of very toxic masculinity that I seem to exist within not just the Met Police. And I bring this, further out. I think, Police Scotland, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, they all have to take a look at themselves and see, does this culture exist? Is there a culture where if someone is showing red flags or they're using horrendously sexual or misogynist language about women while they're on duty, is there a culture of reporting that person, or is this an old boys club where they all cover for each other, where none of these things are reported, where they're swept under the carpet? Or if you are the person who sort of raises an alarm, are you then punished for being a whistleblower in these cases? We need to look at all of this, in a wider context. And the fact is, women are not more fearful of their safety because of this case. We were fearful for our safety before this. And from almost from birth, it's almost ingrained in you to take safety measures when you're out alone, or when you're going somewhere where you're meeting friends. I mean, have you ever went to one of your friends' house and left where they haven't said, phone me when you get home to let me know you're safe? Do men do that when they leave each other's house? I'm not sure they do.
That's an interesting point. Do they, Sebastian?
I think some do, but I think Alison's completely right that it's a totally different paradigm between men and women when they're looking at their safety on the streets. So it's not really comparable at all. And I just think when you look at the response from some in the police, I agree with her as well that it really has been lacking. That we heard from one of the police and crime commissioners in North Yorkshire, I think it was today, who came out and basically said that that women should be more careful, they should not submit to arrest, and really trying to place the burden of blame on them, and he's now wholly apologized for that. But you have to ask yourself, someone who's in that position, of course, police and crime commissioners are elected positions, they do stand for office, but are they fit for that position? If that's the views they actually hold, that you can apologize for those comments, but it doesn't exactly show a huge amount of faith within the system there. And I think the fact you've got the Prime Minister, and I think you've also heard words from Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, about this, really shows the scale of the issue here, that there does need to be some serious institutional reform from the top and bottom of policing to look at how this happened and where these guidelines are, and fundamentally what can be done across the whole country to try and regain that faith. Because it's easy for the likes of the Prime Minister to say, well, do trust the police, but that trust has to be won. It has to be built up over many years. People do feel safe on their streets, and I think it's the damage that's been done by the Wayne Couzens incident and the things that we've heard from court this week are completely horrific, the worst possible things you could ever hear about someone who is serving in the police. And that's the fundamental point of this, is that this guy was a serving police officer at the time. He abused the law, he abused his position to do the most unspeakable, horrific acts. And I think really everybody across our forces has to focus on that's what's happened.
Yes, and we've had the Home Secretary, she's quoted in the Telegraph, saying this is a very clear message to police to raise the bar, treat everybody in the right way. I wonder, Alison, if you could comment on Cresta Dick. We've been covering a YouGov poll, and 38% of the public think that she should go. Do you think it is the time to be talking about that, or is that really a red herring, her staying in her position or not?
This is the problem. If something like this happens, you can take out the person at the top because they should be responsible for it and say they should resign. But who is she to be replaced with? And will that person be any better, or will that person deal with the issues that exist? There's a problem within the police which needs dealt with, and it needs seriously dealt with within the Met. You can see that there's an institutional issue that needs dealt with. Who is going to be the person to do that? I think that it matters if you remove the current commissioner and you put somebody else in the place who's just going to be more of the same. Well, then it's not going to make any difference. But is there someone there who's willing to step up and make actual reform? I actually know that Barbara Gray, who was the Deputy Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, is currently working for the Metropolitan Police. I was sorry to see her leave Northern Ireland. I thought she should have been the new Chief Constable here. I'd like to hear from her because she was very instrumental when she was in Northern Ireland in trying to change the PSNI in terms of domestic abuse and sexual violence against women. So I would like to hear what Barbara Gray has to say, and would she maybe be willing to come out and speak about what actually needs to be done within the Metropolitan Police?
Sebastian, The Guardian, they're talking about an epidemic in the way that crimes against women are treated. For one, women are facing an epidemic of indecent exposure, with police recording more than 10,000 cases last year, but taking fewer than 600 suspects to court. So really, how seriously these cases are being dealt with is another issue.
Indeed, and just to pick up on those comments on Cresta Dick that Alison was saying there, in these circumstances, the immediate reaction for people is to say X must resign because they're the leadership person. They get paid the big wages to carry the can and carry the responsibility here. And I think, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, does have an uneasy relationship with Cresta Dick. That is certainly no secret within Whitehall. But the question here really is, and it speaks to the Guardian, so it's about institutional reform. And one thing that Boris Johnson has pointed out is the number of female police officers has been increasing quite rapidly in recent years. And that is obviously a good thing that can certainly play into that cultural shift and making sure that women feel safer and have more confidence within the police there. But there is, I think, a very real prospect, as The Guardian reports, that this does open the way on a whole load of stuff in policing across the UK, that these incidents aren't being taken seriously enough. And it feels like someone's going to have to get a grip on this quite quickly because, the Sarah Everard, I think, horrified everybody across the whole country and further afield as well when the details broke about that. And British policing has existed for hundreds of years and is something that is based on consent, the consent of the people to believe in their police officers to do that. And I think if you see more stories like on the front of The Guardian saying that these incidents are not being fully followed up, then that consent does fall away. And that leads to a much bigger problem, which is a society we don't want to get to. OK, Sebastian and Alison, thank you very much for the moment. Coming up, help appears to be on the way to solve the fuel shortage. We'll tell you more about that in just a moment. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Sebastian Payne and Allison Morris. There they are, right on cue. Let's have a look at the Mirror and their headline, Caught Short, basically discussing the fact that there are very many sectors where there are a shortage of workers. And this is something that the Prime Minister, according to Sir Keir Starmer, really knew about way back for quite a long time, but did nothing about it. Does that sound like a correct summary to you, Alison?
Well, yeah, I think that every sector is short of staff. I mean, I don't mean to rub it in and make you all feel jealous. We don't have any fuel shortages.
I know, we
In
know,
Northern
we
Ireland, we
know.
have the Northern Ireland, we have the Northern Ireland Protocol, which has mitigated a lot of these disasters. But we do have a staff shortage, and that's obviously to do with the fact that the rules for people from Europe working changed after Brexit, and a lot of people went home, and they just haven't returned, and that has really hit the hospitality sector very badly, and we know that's going to hit food production very badly as well, especially as we come into the Christmas season. You know, we're hearing from a lot of the supermarkets that they're not going to be able to produce a lot of the lines that they usually would have at that time of the year. So something does need to be done. And I mean, you know, anyone could have predicted this. We were told all of this. Obviously, nobody bothered to put that on the side of a bus. But the fact was, we rely very heavily on workers from other places in a lot of sectors, be it in food production or be it with the HGV drivers, which we're saying now. And the fact that nobody bothered to mitigate against that or come up with some alternative to that, I think shows a complete another lack of any kind of government organisation. And I think as we head into the Conservative Party conference this week, it's not a great time to begin into any kind of party conference, is it, considering the sort of disaster that the place is facing at the minute. And we would like to, you know, I think that the fact is that there is going to have to be alternatives, and we're going to have to look at trying to entice workers from other places to come back and work here. How that's done, or what changes have to be made to the rules and regulations, I don't know. But I mean, it's something that should have been looked at a long time ago. We're sort of now trying to mitigate in the face of a disaster. I know that a lot of places in Northern Ireland, especially in the hospitality sector, we have restaurants that are only opening on a sort of Thursday, Friday and Saturday. They just don't have the staff to be able to open at the start of the week, and that's unsustainable as you come into the Christmas period.
But in terms of getting the fuel to the pumps, Sebastian, there is a solution, albeit a temporary solution, but the Prime Minister is bringing in the army from Monday.
Well, I just like to come back on Alison's comments, because I disagree with an awful lot of what she's just said there. That obviously there's no doubt there is a Brexit element to this, that a lot of people we know, particularly Eastern European workers, have gone home after that. But it's simply not all about that particular instance. If you look at all European countries, they're struggling with supply chains. There's been empty shelves in Brussels, in Paris, in Germany. This is about the world economy.
We've not seen the queues at the petrol pumps, though, have we? Yeah, I'm thinking particularly of France. We haven't seen that elsewhere.
We haven't, but if it's my point I was trying to get to, is that this is about a much more fundamental fact of the world economy having shut down following coronavirus, and that it has exposed systemic weaknesses within various countries. And one of the big weaknesses we've had in this country is an over-reliance on just-in-time supply chains. That in about 10 years ago, the Tories sold off some of the last containers we had for keeping CO2 gas here, which was widely cited as one of the reasons for that. And I think you've got to look at the specific reasons behind this before just saying it's all Brexit, because some of it is, some of it isn't. We'll never quite disentangle it in the same way you'll never quite disentangle what the economic hit of Brexit to the UK economy was because coronavirus was so much bigger. Now, to your point about the army, Boris Johnson, yes, has finally brought the army in. They've been undergoing training for the past 72 hours to drive these HGVs. They'll be on the streets from Monday. But I think the most striking comments in the Mail is that this disruption could go on till Christmas, and it'll be interesting to see how forgiving voters are to this. That I think that obviously if you think back to the fuel protest in 2000, when we had a similar situation on forecourts, they did absolutely nothing to Tony Blair's government. That I think in many respects people aren't necessarily blaming politicians, they're blaming
Sebastian,
other circumstances.
we have run out of time. I'm going to have to thank you, but you'll be back and you can speak as much as you like in the 11. Sebastian and Alison, thank you so much.